dolls, and welcome back to another video. Today I would like to take a look at protest fashion. The 1960s were largely defined by the civil rights movement, and fashion definitely played a huge role in that. People started to express their political beliefs on t-shirts and just generally in the way that they dressed. It's a very interesting thing to me because historically speaking, fashion has always been part of protest. But a lot of the fashion that we now see associated with protest comes from the 1960s. So get yourself a drink, get comfortable, and let me take you back to the riot protesting days of the 1960s. The late 60s and 70s were an age when protest wasn't only chanted in the streets, but stitched into what people wore. Every march was a moving runway, every rally a kaleidoscope of meaning. Denim jackets scrawled with anti-war slogans, tie-dye cotton swirling like banners of peace, leather berets and jackets worn with militant pride. Each garment carried a message louder than words. There was no single uniform, no rulebook to follow, only a shared understanding that fashion could be weapon and poem at once. A preacher's daughter might still step out in her pressed blouse and pearls, determined to dignify her cause with restraint, while down another street a barefoot girl in a peasant dress placed a daisy in the barrel of a soldier's gun. Together they formed a patchwork of defiance, a dreamlike tapestry of revolt woven in cloth and color. To walk through the late 60s and 70s is to see clothing transformed into banners of belief. Black Panthers in their matching jackets and berets, women tossing bras and girdles into a freedom trash can, punks tearing down their shirts into political manifestos. Each look was more than fashion. It was declaration, defiance, and sometimes even danger. Chapter 1: The Threats of Revolution. What does an activist look like? Teen Vogue once asked, reflecting on a question that had no single answer. In the late 60s and 70s, that question could be answered on any street corner under the dim glow of street lamps where demonstrators gathered. But protest fashion didn't begin there. Long before tie-dye and leather berets, clothing had been a weapon of dissent. At the turn of the century, suffragettes marched through London in crisp white dresses, purple sashes and green ribbons, their carefully chosen palette being a coat of loyalty and hope. In India, Gandhi's homespun khadi cloth turned simple white cotton into a powerful rejection of British colonial imports. In the US, workers on picket lines often wore their factory uniforms or caps, signaling solidarity through the garments of their labor. Each of these early movements showed that to dress a certain way in public was to declare one's political stance without speaking a word. By the 1950s, this tradition was alive in the civil rights movement. Organizers often insisted that marchers wore their Sunday's best: dark suits, white shirts, stockings, and gloves. The polished appearance was itself a form of defiance, confronting racist stereotypes with dignity and restraint. Rosa Parks, arrested in 1955, was remembered as impeccably dressed, a detail that carried as much symbolic weight as her quiet refusal to give up that seat. Fashion in those moments was carefully staged, a visual demand to be taken seriously. Then came the late 60s and 70s, when the question of what an activist looked like no longer had one answer. Perhaps it was a row of young men in patched denim and work shirts, sleeves rolled up with a mechanic's determination. Their jeans were frayed, knees patched with scraps, the kind of clothes that suggested solidarity with the working poor. Not store-bought looks, but lived-in ones, worn down by marches, sit-ins, and nights spent leafletting under flickering lamps. Perhaps it was a group of women in cardigans and skirts, refusing to let modest clothes soften the sharpness of their demands. They looked ordinary, even traditional, but there was radical power in that ordinariness. The sight of respectable women standing shoulder to shoulder at protest unsettled those who had dismissed feminism as fringe. Their hemlines might have brushed the knees, their stockings might have run, but every step they took made clear the personal was political. And then there was the young boy with long hair and a hand-painted t-shirt, its fabric smudged with slogans, brushstrokes, uneven but urgent. He carried more rage in that shirt than any megaphone could amplify. The t-shirt was his placard, a manifesto worn on the chest. Around him swirled a sea of others, bandanas tied over mouths, denim jackets covered in peace signs, army surplus coats repurposed as uniforms of dissent. But activists weren't cut from one single cloth. They came dressed in wardrobes of their lives: factory jeans, second-hand dresses, hand-knit sweaters, leather jackets, berets, and bangles. To ask what an activist looked like in those years was to witness a living collage of identities. On one side of a street, a preacher's daughter marching in pearls and gloves, on the other a barefoot girl in a patchwork skirt pressing a daisy into the barrel of a gun. There was no uniform, no fixed rule, only the understanding that every garment could carry meaning. Fashion was not separate from the struggle, it was the struggle, stitched and patched, dyed and repurposed, worn boldly into the crowd. Chapter 2: Sunday Best to Denim Blues. Take Selma, Alabama, 1965. A hot morning, the red dust rising with every step, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. leading a sea of marchers down Highway 80 toward Montgomery. They were all impeccably dressed, men in dark suits with ties fastened, women in skirts and hair neatly styled, the look of a Sunday congregation spilling from the pews into the streets. The discipline was deliberate. Movement leaders had insisted on it. If the world was watching, they would see dignity, composure, and respectability, not the caricature segregationists used to belittle them. As one historian notes, women in the civil rights movement often appeared with, quote, neatly pressed hair, cardigans, button-ups, and stockings under skirts with modest hemlines, a look that echoed the stereotypical Sunday best. Their clothes were a uniform as surely as the sheriff deputies who waited with batons. Every pressed collar and polished shoe was a statement. Black Americans were worthy of equal treatment, their bodies and their lives deserving of respect. In an age when appearance justified prejudice, clothes became a quiet but potent weapon. Photographs of Selma, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Washington show seas of hats, ties, and polished shoes. The sight was jarring against the brutality they faced. It was meant to be. The contrast of their careful attire and the clubs and dogs unleashed on them amplified the injustice. Every marcher who tied a white tie or buttoned a cardigan knew they were dressing for history, for the camera's eye, for the conscience of the nation. But by the late 50s, that uniform of pressed suits and stockings began to fray. The struggle was shifting, and so too were its clothes. The anti-war movement swelled, and younger activists took the lead. Liberation began to fall into blue jeans. The tidy uniform gave way to workwear: denim jackets, overall, and chambray shirts. The choice was not merely practical, although the heavy cotton definitely stood up better to long marches, arrests, and nights on hard church floors. It was symbolic. Historian Tanisha Ford explains that, quote, previously denim overalls and jeans had been the standard uniform for black sharecroppers. In reclaiming those garments, young activists aligned themselves with the working poor, rejecting middle-class respectability politics for solidarity with those who had long been left behind. Denim carried the smell of fields, the memory of labor, the history of exploitation, and to wear it was to insist that this history was no longer to be ignored. The shift could be seen as early as 1963. At the March on Washington, some members of King's own contingent stepped out in thick chambray work shirts, their collars open, their sleeves rolled high. As scholar Carolyn A. Jones later noted, that decision, quote, dramatically showed jeans as a symbol of the sharecroppers' overalls to dramatize nothing accomplished since Reconstruction. The photographs of that day tell two stories. On one hand, the polished leaders at the podium. On the other, the denim-clad activists in the crowd, their attire already speaking the language of the next wave. By the time young activists joined hands against the Vietnam War, denim had become a banner in itself. Blue jeans were everywhere, worn patched and frayed by students, by folk singers with guitars slung across their knees, by young men burning draft cards and young women carrying "Make Love, Not War" signs. The same garment that once marked black sharecroppers became the uniform of an international youth revolt. What had begun as Sunday best in Selma ended in patched jeans on college campuses and city streets worldwide. Both styles carried power, both were chosen with care. In one, dignity was claimed in the face of brutality. In the other, solidarity was declared with the oppressed and the dispossessed. Together, they revealed the truth of protest fashion. Every hemline is a history, every fabric a manifesto. Chapter 3: Flower Power and Freedom. On the heels of marches and sit-ins, a new generation took up its own palette. It was a summer of love on the American coasts. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury bloomed into a protest of its own kind. The neighborhood street filled with drifting incense, guitars strumming on stoops, and bodies clothed in colors that seemed almost to move with the music. Bell-bottoms widened with every step, turning sidewalks into stages. Tie-dye spread like wildfire, not bought but made, each swirl of color unique to its wearer. The process itself, dunking and twisting fabric in buckets of dye, a communal act of creativity and defiance. These weren't uniforms from above, but costumes of self-invention. Alongside the rainbow cotton came peasant dresses and tunics borrowed from faraway traditions, a nod to the Eastern philosophies many young Americans were embracing. Kaftans, Indian kurtas, Afghan coats lined with sheepskin, garments that once spoke of ancient rituals now appeared on American lawns and festival fields, signaling openness to a world beyond the West. Jewelry was handmade and plentiful, strings of beads, macrame belts, jangling bangles that turned a simple walk into music. Flowers woven into the hair or stitched into embroidery became their insignia, fragile, fleeting, but powerful. Flower power was more than a slogan. It was an aesthetic that transformed clothing into a manifesto of nonviolence. Nowhere was this language clearer than at the great music gatherings. Monterey Pop in 1967, Woodstock in 1969, Altamont later that year. Fields became a sea of patchwork and color, every outfit a tiny protest against conformity. A girl might drift past in a gauzy maxi dress, painted with suns and moons, a boy in an embroidered vest covered in mirrors and bells. From above, the crowds looked like living tapestries, moving patterns of freedom. Their style rejected the stiff silhouettes of the 50s, short hair, pencil skirts, pressed collars. In their place came looseness, drape, and flow. The body was unshackled, bare feet pressed into the grass. It was as much about how the clothes felt as it was about how they looked. Soft cotton, natural fibers, clothes that could be danced in all night without breaking. At dawn by a campfire, a young woman in a kaftan pulls a patch from her satchel and stitches it onto her denim vest. 4 words in crooked threads. Make love, not war. Around her, others string beads, mend hems, paint slogans on jackets. Clothing was not static. It was living, shifting, handmade, ever-changing. Each piece became a moving canvas, a wearable declaration stitched into the seams of a generation. I am, for example, wearing this shirt today that I got gifted by a small business. It says, "War is not the answer," and then a whole lot more over here. I adore this shirt. It fits a little odd because I'm very heavily pregnant, but I love this shirt. And these shirts all go back to the 60s. They go back to those nights and those people who decided to put their message on their clothing. And that was so revolutionary and new back then. And it's such a clever way of making a political statement before you have even said anything. Chapter 4: Black Panthers, Uniform of Defiance. By the autumn of 1966 in Oakland, another Black American image emerged, as stark and powerful as a silhouette in film noir. On corners and courthouse steps, the Black Panther Party staged its first armed citizen patrols against police brutality, and with them came a look that was impossible to ignore. Gone were the carefully pressed Sunday suits of earlier marches. In their place appeared black leather jackets, dark slacks, polished shoes, and the now iconic black beret. Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, and their brothers knew that appearance was a language. Their uniform was sharp, deliberate, and intimidating in its precision. A powder blue shirt or crisp white turtleneck under the jacket, black gloves gripping law books or rifles, berets tilted just so. According to historian Mary Vargas, the beret itself was inspired by French resistance fighters and old war films, a nod to militancy and defiance. The effect was electric. In a country still reeling from images of black Americans in chains or servile caricatures on screen, here was an entirely different picture, strong, organized, unflinching. On rainy Oakland mornings, dozens of Panthers would march downtown in formation, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm. The sound, the clack of leather, the metallic clash of belts was a statement all in its own. Children on the sidewalks watched in awe, police officers bristled, newspapers described them as menacing, yet to black communities the sight was one of pride. By dressing the part, the Panthers flipped the script. What white Americans saw as threatening became, within the movement, a badge of dignity and unity. It wasn't only about style, it was about control of the gaze. The beret and jacket acted as armor, commanding respect in hostile public spaces. Women in the party matched the men in their severity. Kathleen Cleaver with her natural afro halo and leather coat, Angela Davis later with her fierce gaze and turtlenecks, each of them embodying a new vision of female militancy. The afro itself became an extension of the uniform, a natural crown that defied Eurocentric beauty standards and declared black is beautiful, black is powerful. The Panther look rippled outward. Soon it wasn't confined to Oakland. Chapters in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles adopted the same silhouette until the beret and leather jacket became shorthand for Black Panthers across the nation. Even beyond America, the image spread. In Algiers, in South Africa, in Caribbean diasporas, young activists donned similar attire, borrowing from the Panthers to frame their own struggles for liberation. In the late 60s, clothing could transform a person into an icon. For the Panthers, it turned every street into a stage of resistance. Their look was not costume, but statement. Uniform as language, fashion as protest, a style so precise it still lingers today as a symbol of uncompromising defiance. Chapter 5. Parisian Passion, May 68 on the Barricades. Paris, May of 1968. The city was alive with smoke and slogans. Tear gas curled through narrow boulevards, posters were slapped onto stone walls, and paving stones were pried loose to build barricades. Yet, even in the chaos, the French instinct for style refused to vanish. The revolution wore berets and scarves, striped sweaters, modest shift dresses, and simple trench coats. Students and workers alike marched in sober, everyday chic, their clothes practical, but never without a hint of elegance. Some garments were daubed with hastily painted slogans, fragments of poetry and rage scrawled across jackets and dresses. The scene had its own understated glamour. A girl might dash from a lecture hall with her hair in a bouffant, only to find herself in a cloud of tear gas by Sorbonne. A boy in horn-rimmed glasses and a wrinkled blazer stood shouting on a barricade, cigarette dangling, a red armband tied to his sleeve. Together, they looked less like militants than like bohemians caught in a moment of history. On the barricades, fashion became improvisation. A girl tied her scarf into a makeshift mask. A boy repurposed a worker's jacket smudged with dust and spray paint. Against the flutter of French flags, jeans and simple blouses became as much a uniform of rebellion as any helmet or armband. Later, designers would romanticize it. Decades on, Gucci even staged a faux student sit-in with models lounging in tweed jackets and polished boots. But in spring of 1968, the look was not couture. It was raw, homegrown, pulled together from what was in the closet that morning. The rebellion style was simply Parisian life. Striped Breton shirts, school coats, workers' pants, thrown suddenly into the fire of revolution. Paris, after all, had always worn resistance well, and in May of 1968, it dressed for the future. Chapter 6. Women's Liberation, From Pageants to Pantsuits. One morning in the same year, an ocean away, the Atlantic City boardwalk became an unexpected stage of revolt. Women activists stormed the Miss America pageant armed not with sashes or sequins, but with sharp placards and an enormous trash can. They were tired of being paraded like livestock, tired of society's narrow definition of beauty. The contest symbolized everything they sought to append, the idea that a woman's value could be measured in bust, waist, and hip. In a symbolic gesture, the organizers introduced the Freedom Trash Can. Into it they hurled bras, girdles, curlers, wigs, high heels, and glossy beauty magazines, the trappings of what they called women's oppression. Though nothing was set on fire, the imagery burned all the same. Newspaper ran with the phrase bra burning, and the world had its headline. The real fire was metaphorical. The wardrobe of the 50s was being publicly dismantled in front of cameras. This was not only a protest against the pageant, but against an entire script of appearance. Gone were the crinolines, kitten heels, and bullet bras that had shaped the mid-century silhouette. In their place came a battle uniform of choice, jeans and t-shirts, slacks, dungarees. Practicality itself became rebellion. To wear trousers was to step out of the box society had drawn. By the 1970s, that quiet revolution had become a new normal on picket lines and university campuses. Denim jumpsuits, flared trousers, and crisp button-downs became the uniform of women on the front lines of gender justice. Their clothes mirrored the utilitarian looks of their male counterparts, signaling solidarity and seriousness. Fashion historian Sonia Abrego notes that second-wave feminists often adopted sensible and rational clothing that, quote, tended to disguise femininity and skewed masculine, simply to be taken seriously in spaces still dominated by men. The movement had its own icons of style. Gloria Steinem, with her aviator glasses, long straight hair, and simple turtlenecks, embodied the fusion of intellect and cool defiance. Angela Davis, though more often linked to Black Power, became just as much a symbol of women's liberation, her towering afro paired with black leather jackets or sober turtlenecks announcing both political militancy and a reclamation of beauty standards. Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman elected into the Congress in 1968, wore bright suits and bold patterns, proving that seriousness and style could coexist. And writers like Betty Friedan, though often photographed in conservative blouses and skirts, showed how even ordinary wardrobes could cloak radical thought. Meanwhile, in fashion houses, subtle shifts were underway. Diane von Furstenberg's wrap dress of 1974 became a uniform for the professional woman. Easy, flattering, and flexible, it allowed a new kind of freedom, a dress that could go from office to protest to dinner without apology. The tailored power suit with sharp shoulders and trousers declared that authority was not gendered. By the close of the decade, the so-called liberation of women had stitched itself into everyday dress. Clothes that had once been dismissed as unladylike, trousers, boots, oversized jackets, were worn proudly in boardrooms and on picket lines. The wardrobe had shifted from lace and heels to denim and suits, each scene carrying the message: a woman was far more than her stereotype, and she would dress for the life she demanded. Chapter 7. Global Wardrobe, White, Dashikis, and Every Color of Liberation. The flame of protest did not only burn in the West. In Tokyo in 1960, young Japanese activists took the street at a U.S. security rally, and they too spoke through clothing. Thousands of them marched on the diet in white outfits, a bold choice meant to highlight the blood that the police had spilled as television cameras captured streams of crimson on pale fabric. The stark white became a living canvas of solidarity with injured comrades. And across the globe, former colonies found new pride in native dresses. African and African American activists helped make the West African dashiki iconic. By the late 60s and early 70s, the dashiki, a loose, colorful tunic, was no less African, whether worn in Africa or thousands of miles away in New York. The Panthers and jazz musicians adopted it along with afros and raised fists, turning the garment into an emblem of black pride, as illustrative of the beauty of black power. In other lands, guerrilla fighters in Latin America wore military fatigues like uniforms of resistance, and Indian protesters harked back to Gandhi's homespun khadi to shun Western suits once again. Out of every continent came a fashion statement: dashikis in New York, peasant print dresses in New Delhi, combat jackets in Managua, each cloth a banner of independence. When a person donned one of these garments, it was a silent declaration: I am part of a movement that spans oceans. Chapter 8: King's Road Rebellion, Punk's Sharp-Edged Couture. By 1976, London's King's Road had erupted in fashion lightning. Once a genteel shopping street, it was suddenly a battlefield of culture. Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren had transformed a tiny Chelsea boutique, a shop that had cycled through names like Let It Rock and Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, before finally becoming Sex, into a workshop of anarchy. Its window displays alone could stop traffic. Mannequins in rubber, shirts scrawled with obscenities, slogans daring pedestrians to look away. Inside, clothes became weapons. I hijacked the fashion to say what I want to say about everything else, Vivienne Westwood later explained, clarifying that punk wasn't a trend but a mouthpiece. She and McLaren designed for what they called young urban guerrillas. Ripped trousers with zip crotches and dangling straps, bondage belts, tartan skirts held together with safety pins, all toughened with studs and black leather. Vivienne Westwood herself recalled how her bondage trousers, quote, mix reference to army combat gear, motorcyclists, leathers, and fetish wear, a deliberate hybrid for subversives. Their t-shirts were provocations in cotton. Frayed muslin tops were silk-screened with college-like graphics, the Queen's portrait safety pinned through the lips, swastikas mashed against pop lyrics, naked breasts at chest level. These weren't clothes you wore quietly. They shouted, spat, and dared you to flinch. The most notorious of it all was the Destroy shirt, a tattered canvas emblazoned with a giant Nazi swastika, the word destroy in bold capitals and lines from Sex Pistols songs. Vivienne later explained that it was meant to, quote, challenge older generations and reject fascist taboos. It wasn't endorsement but provocation, a way to force a confrontation, to make the past rear its ugly head rather than remain politely hidden. On stage and on the street, punks became walking art bombs. Safety pins pierced skin as well as fabric. Hair stood in sharp, dyed mohawks, spikes of rebellion that turned the body itself into sculpture. Fishnets ripped, eyeliner smeared, Doc Martens stumped out the last remnants of 60s flower power. The effect was contagious. By 1977, the year of Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, punk style had spilled out of King's Road and into the wider world. The Sex Pistols snarled, God Save the Queen, and teenagers across Britain took to shredding their own clothes, customizing jackets with studs and paint, scribbling anarchy symbols on their backs. Each ripped t-shirt, each jagged haircut became a poem of defiance, as deliberate as a manifesto, as raw as a scream. I feel like that Destroy shirt is very iconic nowadays, and it is interesting because I am from Germany, and here you're not allowed to wear swastika, which obviously is very understandable, but you're also not always allowed to wear it crossed out, because basically you cannot wear the symbol, whether it is crossed out or not. And I used to work as a prop master, and I once filmed something where we needed to have like this whole Nazi memorabilia stuff, and because you can't really get it, we had to make it ourselves. So we screen printed a lot of swastika flags, and afterwards you have to destroy every single piece. So we went in with cutters, with knives, with scissors, and just cut it all apart, because you're not allowed to have that. But I do think because that symbol is so tied to the movement, obviously, it works really well, and it is a great example of how just a crossed out swastika is such a political statement. And that is basically all these t-shirts and these slogans are. It's the idea that you look at someone, and without having spoken a word to them, you know their political stance, you know what they stand for. And I honestly do believe that this is a great way to just make a political standpoint in your everyday life. As the 70s came to an end, protest fashion had already stitched itself into the fabric of history. The late 60s and 70s had a vivid wardrobe of dissent, sharp Sunday suits marching through Selma, blue chambray shirts at the March on Washington, jeans patched with peace signs at Woodstock, black berets and leather coats in Oakland, bras and girdles tossed into a freedom trash can in Atlantic City, striped sweaters and workers' jackets on Parisian barricades, spiked hair and shredded shirts roaring down King's Road. Each look was different, yet all spoke the same language of defiance. The question of what does an activist look like never had one answer. In those years, a protester might have appeared in a neatly pressed dress and gloves, a flowing kaftan carried home from India, a denim vest heavy with patches, or a tartan skirt fastened with safety pins. Sometimes the message was subtle, the choice of natural hair or shift dress that allowed freedom of movement. Sometimes it was loud, a t-shirt screaming slogans, a jacket painted with rage, a uniform designed to command attention. What tied it all together was intent. Every garment was chosen with care, every outfit a declaration. By the close of the decade, protest had become inseparable from style itself. Music festivals looked like carnivals of resistance. City streets felt like impromptu fashion shows of solidarity. To open a magazine in 1977 was to see not only models in couture, but also photographs of punks in ripped shirts, feminists in trousers, students in scarves, the revolution and the runway bleeding into one another. And yet, these clothes were never just about looking. They were about being. To button a cardigan in Selma was to claim dignity in the face of hatred. To pull on denim overalls in Alabama was to stand with the working poor. To let hair grow long and wild in San Francisco was to step out of conformity. To tie a black beret in Oakland was to demand respect. To throw a bra into a trash can in Atlantic City was to shed an old script. To rip a t-shirt on King's Road was to write a new one. In the end, every hemline, every patch, every stitch once worn against injustice is a thread connecting movements across time. Under stadium lights or street lamps, under the smoke of tear gas or the glow of festival fires, these garments still whisper the same dream of justice. The future those rebels imagined is still unwritten, but its patterns, dyed, embroidered, pinned, and unraveled, remain woven into the restless tapestry of style. So that is it for today's video. That is it for my take on 1960s and 70s protest fashion. I love this explaining fashion series, and I know you love it too, so I really wanted to make a part all about the wonderful world of protest fashion, because I do truly believe that the 1960s played a huge role in shaping how we wear protest fashion nowadays. Peace signs became so emblematic. Shirts like this one are basically replicas or spins on 1960s original designs. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If there's any other type of 1960s fashion you would like me to talk about, make sure to leave a comment. I would love to make it happen. If you enjoyed the video, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. If you like what you saw, consider subscribing. Stick around. I make videos about the 60s and 70s every single week, and I would love to have you around. This is a little bit of a special video. Today is September 4th, and you're not seeing this video until early November, and that is because my due date is in 19 days. Today is my last day of filming. I have one more video to film, the Chelsea Hotel one. That's the final video that I'm going to film because it just worked out better in scheduling. But I just wanted to say that when you see me next week, I'm going to look a little different because it's going to be 2 months. At least I don't think I'm going to start filming again until late October because I have enough videos to cover the entire time period of me being gone. I just wanted to say that. So if you're coming back next week and I look a little different, it's because I had a baby and it's been 2 months. But yeah, I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine. Take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today. And I will catch you in the next video. Bye, dolls.